All right, welcome everyone. As it's 7 o'clock, we're going to start tonight's meeting of the DEI committee. We usually begin by reviewing the agenda. So tonight we'll start with public comment for items not on the agenda, followed by approval of November's minutes. After that, Kate Larose from VCIL will present and take questions from the committee. Then the committee will take some time to ask questions, hopefully, of Jericho's town administrator and town clerk about town meeting and the select board petitioning process. SJ will then take us through the town meeting survey results, after which the public in attendance, we have one public that's arriving, that's good, are encouraged to comment. The committee will take some time to discuss and decide whether to petition the select board. We'll then pivot from town meeting, where there'll be an update on efforts to create a town event to denounce hate. This will be followed up by a discussion on a statement submitted by Brian against hate. And then finally, we'll go over rules and timing for our next meeting. Are there any questions about the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. So our next item is to hear public comment. We have Lori here. If Lori would like to say something now, but we'll open it up for public comment for items not on the agenda. We'll reserve comments about town meeting for the designated time. Would anyone from the public like to say something at this time? All right. Next up is to approve our November minutes. Hopefully all were able to take a look at them. Brian had asked that the word partly be added to item 8A to say that he joined the committee partly to bring attention to ... Does anyone have any other changes they'd like made to November's minutes?
I just have what I think is just a typo, but it says let me find the specific place where it says it under somewhere. Number 6D. It says energy audit and it should be equity audit.
I think Brian caught that too. I forgot about that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Energy equity audit. The problem is my husband's building a workshop and we're dealing with energy. Anyone else? All right. Do we have a motion to approve November's minutes?
I'll move.
Anyone second?
I'll second.
All right. I'm not used to doing this, but any discussion on them? We've had the discussion. So I'll raise your hand or indicate by saying aye if you would like to approve the minutes.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Unanimous. Congratulations.
I will abstain just because I wasn't here for the November meeting.
I thought I saw your hand up. Sorry. SJ's abstain. I should double check, Nathan. You are taking notes, right, tonight? Okay, good. Welcome to note taking for the committee. So we're glad to have you. All right. Well, our next agenda item is to have a presentation about disabled Vermonters and their inability to participate in local government due to accessibility issues. We welcome Kate Larose from the Vermont Center for Independent Living. Hi, Kate. Thanks for coming, and whenever you're ready.
All right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Larose, and I serve as the statewide pandemic equity coordinator with the Vermont Center for Independent Living. At VCIL, we are people with disabilities working together for dignity, independence, and civil rights. My work includes assessing and responding to the current pandemic-related issues Vermonters with disabilities are experiencing, including for COVID long haulers, developing resources and community, and supporting people in advocating for equal access to education, healthcare, and civic life. I am here today as both a VCIL employee and as a Vermonter. In 2018, my life was brimming with civic engagement. I attended city council and school board meetings, was appointed to multiple statewide councils, drove to the State House to testify at public hearings, and even ran for a House seat that I lost by a couple dozen votes. I had ample opportunity to be an engaged community member. Shortly thereafter, I experienced a traumatic brain injury and became disabled. Of all the things that changed for me during that time, one of the most challenging was losing the ability to be part of my community. Lack of accessible participation options meant that I was suddenly and completely shut out of civic engagement. This is the reality for many people with disabilities. I am hopeful that towns across the state, including Jericho, will change that. And to look forward, we need to first look back. Let's go back 3 decades and start with 1991. In 1991, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act was issued. Under Title II, people with disabilities must have equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from state and local government programs, services, and activities, including all meetings and elections. And now to 2017. In 2017, the U.S. Government Accountability Office sampled 178 polling locations to determine accessibility and released a report sharing their findings. Their focus was on impediments to physical accessibility at the time. They found that 16% of polling locations, 60%, were inaccessible. And in 2018, the Vermont Secretary of State's office launched the use of the Omniballot, a tablet and online-based system compatible with accessibility devices to ensure that some people with disabilities can vote independently. And in 2020, the COVID public health emergency began. H 681 was signed into law. Section 1 reads, quote, "It is the intent of the General Assembly that, if the COVID-19 pandemic continues its expected spread in the state of Vermont, the citizens of Vermont should be able to protect their health, safety, and welfare, while also continuing to exercise their right to participate in elections in order to maintain our democratic institutions." This included suspending the requirement for petitions with signatures, provided a means for electronic meeting participation, and enabled town meetings to be conducted via Australian ballot. It's also worth noting that current COVID-19 spread today is far greater than it was when this bill was signed into law. And for all the harms that came along with the pandemic, one of the silver linings was that for many people with disabilities, including myself and others here tonight, state and local governments provided an accessible means for equal participation. In 2021, before we'd even heard of Omicron and kids weren't yet eligible for vaccination, Governor Scott declared the end of the pandemic in Vermont via a gold seal decree, and with it went newly created accessibility. Shortly thereafter, I and many others had civic participation taken from us once again. Here are just 2 examples I experienced. In August of 2021, the City of St. Albans held a meeting to create their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Community members wanting to public comment reached out to the city manager requesting virtual access, to which he replied, "We find the quality of participation diminishes greatly when we are not in the same room." Eventually, a request was put in, he relented, and it was able to be a hybrid meeting, but this was for a DEI meeting. In March of 2022, I was able to request an absentee ballot for the town of Canaan, where I lived at the time. When I received my ballot, I found it nearly empty. I was unable to vote on the town or school budget, and the latter failed by a handful of votes. There was no means of identification on the ballot request or the ballot itself, identifying that most of the articles were not included. And that brings us to 2023. This year, despite having H42 signed into law, which gave towns the tools they needed to make voting accessible to all, 175 select boards chose to move ahead with local elections that were inaccessible to many, especially older Vermonters and those with disabilities. As one town clerk was reported as saying, "It's nothing exciting or unusual, it's back to business." Despite federal civil rights law being clear about providing people with disabilities, quote, "full and equal opportunity to vote in all elections," under current Vermont law, select boards have the option to discriminate. Despite public comment, published commentary, and submitted ADA requests for reasonable accommodations, that's exactly what most towns around the state did. I'll share just a few examples with you here. In Brattleboro, appeals for accessibility resulted in a 3-2 vote for no remote option. And I want to read this quote from this Brattleboro Reformer piece here that Sarah Turbo had published. Quote, "Covert barriers to access like these make it difficult or impossible for young people, disabled people, and working people to participate. Instead, even our most ostensibly accessible bodies are dominated by those who have the most free time, the most resources, and the most robust health. In other words, the most privileged. So much for democracy by the people, for the people." In Cambridge, multiple people requested accessible voting options for health and safety reasons at a public meeting, but only one individual who put the request in writing afterwards, which is not a requirement, was granted an accommodation. In one central Vermont town, an individual put in an accommodation request to vote on their town budget. The town clerk said that wasn't possible. The voter later received their absentee ballot and the budget article was listed. When they called to thank the clerk, they were told it was a printing error and that that version of the ballot would have to be returned, their vote uncounted. And in my current town of Newark, Vermont, the select board considered my request, but determined that it wasn't reasonable. When I requested the minutes from the meeting in which this was decided, I was told that the only way to get access to select board meeting minutes was to schedule a time to go to the clerk's office in person to view paper copies stored in the vault. This was the town meeting experience I was offered instead, a blank screen with bad sound, no absentee ballot option, and when I asked a question, I was quickly told by the moderator that I could not speak. As you consider helping to ensure that Jericho's next town meeting day and ongoing aspects of civic participation are accessible to all members of the community, not only some, I hope you will remember these stories and others that have been shared with you about the need for both virtual and in-person access. Accessibility and inclusion don't happen by accident, and they don't happen by virtue of good intentions alone. They happen because of the unwavering dedication and commitment to equity by groups of people such as yourself. Thank you so much. I want to leave you tonight with this excerpt from the Vermont Coalition for Disability Rights Statement on Inclusive Town Meetings. Quote, "For too long, town meeting day has not provided opportunity for equal representation, including for people with disabilities, older Vermonters, those without access to transportation, and people who are unable to obtain childcare or time off from work. At VCDR, we believe that the ability to exercise one's civil right to vote in local elections is an essential prerequisite to equitable access to life in Vermont. Though the ongoing pandemic further uncovered and perpetuated deep disparities in many ways, it also provided unprecedented access and inclusion in others. One of these ways was shifting town meetings so that anyone could vote, whether they were able to be physically present in the room or not. VCDR recognizes that community and democracy are both stronger when everyone is able to take part." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate, for coming and presenting on this important yet easily forgotten issue. For those who might not know me and can't see my disability on camera, I am paralyzed from the chest down with limited movement of my arms and hands, and I operate a power wheelchair. I attended the in-person floor meeting for town meeting when I first moved to Jericho just over 10 years ago, but decided it was not worth risking my health to force my body to stay past my routine care times to endure the whole meeting, which starts early in the morning and runs 3 to 4 hours long. For this reason, moving town meeting to, say, a Saturday or making it a holiday would not change access issues for someone like me. but I've never said anything about it because I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I'm used to having to accept that societal rules and norms do not always include me. Kate, I am wondering if you could please comment on how people with disabilities often remain silent rather than speak up about issues that affect them.
Thank you. It's a really good question. So in my work with people around the state, as they've reached out to see what can be done to get their civil rights met, I'll tell you how the conversations go. And it doesn't matter if it's healthcare, education, or access to civic engagement. It goes like this. People will say, this is really important to me. It's really important to me because I want to be able to vote on the next representatives in our town. I want to be able to vote on our town budget. I can't afford taxes anymore, or it's really important because, this is my access to healthcare. And then they say, but I think I'm going to have to be okay with not doing it because if I ask, this is what I'm afraid is going to happen. And when they tell me their fears, I have to say, I think your fears are well-founded. So what they'll say is, if I ask for a reasonable accommodation, all my neighbors are just going to talk about me. And it's like, well, they are, and they're going to talk about it in a town meeting, right? Or in a select board meeting. It will probably be executive session. Hopefully, sometimes they don't do it correctly. And yeah, people will talk about it, and people will say, well, do I have to let them know what my disability is? Do I need to let them know what the specifics are? Technically you don't, but you may have to you may have to go to the doctor. You may have to get a letter. Some select boards don't make people go through that. They really ought not to, but some do. And it gets expensive, right? You have to take time off work. You have to go to the doctor. You have to get a letter. You have to pay for additional appointments. And then when you go through all that, there's the stress of then waiting to see, like, what have your neighbors decided? Have they decided that you too deserve equal rights? Or are they deciding that you can pass on rights this year? Personally, I know what that feels like. When your neighbors tell you that it's not important to them, or it's inconvenient to them, or that it's not worth their time to try to figure out a creative solution like Cambridge did. And it's not easy. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And so that's one of the major things that keeps people from even speaking out or even asking, because they know what the pushback is going to be. And in some towns, the pushback might be quite loud. I've lived in some of those towns. That doesn't feel great. And in some towns, it might be quiet, but that doesn't make it less harmful and less hurtful. Because it's still there and people are still talking about it. And so these are just for basic rights, like the ability to be able to vote where you're living, on your budget. There was one individual who was an 85-year-old veteran, and he physically was not able to, even if he was able to get care attendants to work those days, to be able to physically leave the house and then be able to sit for that amount of time, it wasn't possible. And there was an issue that was so important to him. And he just kept saying, I was a decorated military veteran, and I just can't vote on my town budget. I don't understand. Why don't they want me and my voice and my experience at the table? Because this is what I fought for. And now I'm being shut out. And so these are some of the things that keep people from asking. Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. I think everyone that you ask is going to have a slightly different answer, but it's the fear of being shut out by your community, which is pretty painful.
Thank you for sharing all that. I'm also wondering, how would you respond to comments that some have said, well, it's unfortunate if a small percentage of residents would like to attend town meeting but cannot due to access reasons. It's not enough of a reason to move away from in-person voting.
Yeah. So I would challenge people on this committee to really focus on when you think about equity and the value of equity and your belief system of equity, what does that mean to you? Does that mean equity for the majority? Right? Or does it mean equity really allowing and ensuring everyone has access? Everyone. There are certain things that for the most part, there's been enough of a cultural shift. I think of things like wheelchair ramp access. There's still a lot of, especially in Vermont, there's still a lot of places that do not have access. But by and large, I think a group of elected officials, if presented with the need for ASL interpretation or wheelchair access, or try to think of another one that might be just, it wasn't common 30, 40 years ago, but now it's been accepted as common. Maybe getting access to things in other languages or Braille. So people tend not to, in public meetings, when those sorts of access needs come up, say, well, how many people really are we going to have voting that day that's going to need ASL? And it's like, well, isn't one enough? Right? Like, why is this a numbers game now? Isn't one enough? It's about making sure everyone has access. But for whatever reason, I think the pandemic in some really bad ways became this cultural shift away from equal access and away from equity. And it became this focus where it was actually acceptable for people as a group to say that the convenience of some is more important than access for others. And we're moving backwards in a lot of ways on that. So that's what I would challenge you all to do, is when you think about the term of equity, what does that mean to you? And isn't one enough?
And if Jericho would decides to vote to move to the Australian ballot, how would doing so make voting more inclusive and accessible for everyone in town?
Yeah. So, with reasonable modifications and reasonable accommodations, the thing that I really appreciate about them when they're done right under the Americans with Disabilities Act is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a this or that. When accommodations are done really well, it ensures that everyone is able to get their needs met. It takes a lot of work. You all are on the DEI committee. You know about that. You know about conflicting access needs, right? So I think of the town of Cambridge and what they did, which was so wonderful, is they didn't have time to switch to Australian ballot. But what they did was they were able to figure out a way that, based on the needs of the folks who had asked for access, they were able to get their needs met, and they were able to get others' needs met too. So it was everyone's needs were met. Unfortunately, theirs was not universal, so they didn't make an announcement to the greater public at large saying, hey, if you need access, have access needs, we're able to meet it, and here's how we can do it. But making sure that it's not always a one size fits all, and this is it, there are no other alternatives, but everyone has their access needs met. So being open to that, that it's not a one size fits all approach. With Australian ballot, it may work really well for some people to be able to do Australian ballot in person. It may work really well for others with Australian ballot to mail it in. You may have others who might need to do curbside drop off, right? So even with that, there may not be a one size fits all approach. But when it comes down to it, I think what I've heard time and time again is that people who are really, the smaller number of people who are really sad about any changes to town meeting, is that they see that as a changed tradition. And when you ask them, what is it about town meeting and the tradition that feels really important to you? It's the community aspect, right? So, okay, great. So you love the potluck. Guess what? We can have potlucks. It's still possible to have potlucks and to vote. It's still possible to sit with your neighbors and be able to have that camaraderie, or to be able to do that in a Zoom session, right? And still have everybody being able to have access to vote. So meeting the needs of all is great, especially though, always prioritizing the civil rights of those who have civil rights. So that was a very long-winded answer. Yeah, sorry about that.
No. Really appreciate your insight. And I want to open it up to the rest of the committee. Do you have any questions you would like to ask Kate?
I have some questions, Kate. Hi, my name is Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been, it's very compelling. And, I started to think about, okay, if we do go to Australian ballot, which when I looked at the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns site, their tracker, quite a few towns do have Australian ballot for town budget. But I'm wondering if you have talked to any of those towns, like Heinsberg comes to mind as a town that's sort of like Jericho that has recently moved to Australian ballot for the budget, to see how they might have been able to address those concerns of the perceived lack of community or lack of public dialogue around the budget process, and how, like, what were they able to do that in a different way?
Yeah, so I tend to talk to folks who are folks with disabilities who are not having access. And so that's who I tend to speak with. And that's when those issues become known to me. From a DEI perspective, though, what I would say is that I would ask those towns, what was their percentage turnout in the past? And with that percentage turnout of town meeting day, what was the demographics of those who showed up, right? So it's not just the federal civil rights side of it and the reasonable accommodation side of it. It's single parents who have 2 jobs and are not able to show up at the table. They can't put in an ADA request for this, but they just as much as anyone else deserve the right to participate and vote. It's, folks who may be sick. There were a number of even elected officials last time who couldn't even show up at town meeting day because they actively had COVID themselves. And so because the town didn't pass a law beforehand, they weren't even allowed to show up on Zoom and give their report, right? And so I think it was when that happened, they were like, oh, that would have been helpful if I could have at least been able to give my report as an elected official. But these are the sorts of things that are going to keep happening over and over again. And the other thing that I would wonder for the towns that have made the switch is, were they able? See, it's hard because I think select board members have a different perspective on what they're wanting out of town meeting day than maybe what the average citizen wants or what a DEI committee wants and hopes for. And I think at times those values are certainly different. I don't want to say that they're in conflict, but there may be times when they are in conflict. I've been to Zoom meetings in the past where select board members and city council members, like, just before they get going, before the meeting starts, they'll say things like, oh, I can't wait until this is over. We don't have to do Zoom anymore. It's better when we're all able to be here in person because, we can look people in the eye. And when we're able to look people in the eye, like, we don't get as many of the riffraff coming out and doing public comment, and things like that. And so for some city council members and select board members, like, equal access is not what they want. Like, transparency is not something that some actually want, right? They want to, in their mind, just be able to do their job, do their work, and not get bothered about things that might have been said or done or voted on. So there are definitely times when I think a DEI committee is going to have a different take on it. And it may be quite a bit more than just what percentage of people showed up and voted.
Could you share some, hi, I'm SJ. Could you share some more specifics about what Cambridge did that was a creative solution?
I'm thinking about it just to make sure I'm not sharing any. So in that specific case, this was public record. So in that specific case, there were a number of folks that showed up and gave testimony before that vote happened. And it was people who I think someone from like the disability and aging community showed up and said, like, look, these are all the people that are not going to be able to vote. And they're very upset about it and they're very concerned. And like another person showed up and said, like, I have an oxygen tank and my doctor's saying that I can't go anywhere right now, where there's especially in March, I think last year, there were higher than normal rates of like everything. And they said, I can't show up. And then a third person testified and said the same thing as well. And then I think there was a fourth maybe about mobility reasons. And so the vote happened. They didn't create anything that was universally accessible. One of the four followed up and put in an ADA request. The other three were not offered any accessible options or even followed up with, to my knowledge. But the fourth one who did put in the request I think what they did is they set up, it was at the school building, and they set up a separate room, and they were able to get approval maybe, or just make sure that it was all good with the Secretary of State's office, that they could do, it wasn't video because it was like all internal to the school, but the person in that room had video camera access to the floor. They could talk as any other member of the public could on the floor from their separate space. And there was like a runner who like would go back and forth with like the ballots. And so that wouldn't work for everyone, right? Like one of the individuals who even spoke at public comment was around physical accessibility needs. Like that would not have worked for them if that had been offered to them. But in responding to that one specific ADA request, that seemed to work really well.
I guess, and Maria, maybe as chair, you can tell me if this is a question for another time. I'm wondering, as a DEI committee, regardless of whether we go down this Australian ballot path or not, and regardless of how the town ends up voting on that, what are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about offering, that we as a DEI committee can be doing to bring accessibility options to those who may want them, instead of, you know, waiting for that one person to be moved enough to, you know, be willing to say, I need this accommodation. Like, what are some of the things that we can be pushing for, or that we as a committee can be offering to increase accessibility, whether or not Australian ballot passes for us?
Good question.
Was that a question for Maria? Or is that?
No, I think it's more for you.
Okay.
It's for you. I just wanted Maria to be able to
Yeah.
veto the question if it was going to take up time.
So I think being proactive, like now, right now, and starting to ask the community, what unmet access needs do you have to ensure that you can fully participate on town meeting day? Letting folks know what to expect. Like, this is how to, like, once you decide how you're going to move forward, let people know what to expect. So given this setup, this is where people will park, this is where people will come in, this is, you know, like, really explain it, like, what access needs do people have? And so people might be, there are certain things that you can just do that I think would probably be universally helpful. So town meetings, I don't know if it's because like it's expensive to print on paper or what, but like that print is so itty bitty tiny. Like, it is itty bitty tiny. And so I think just like starting off the bat with like having like, you know, 12 or 14 point font or above, or at least having beside every single written piece of anything, having large print, making sure, like, I think I can follow up with Maria. Vermont Legal Aid Disability Law Project has just a general overview of like what size font to use, the type class of font, colors that can be used that are helpful with accessibility. This is hard. I know it's challenging, but plain language, making sure that plain language is what's used, even when it can't necessarily be on the ballot in plain language, but having the moderator or people introducing things use plain language to describe what's about to be voted on and what it means. And we are very much an ongoing pandemic. It is getting worse. The numbers are worse. And we also by the day have more newly disabled people, including COVID long haulers. And the number one thing COVID long haulers cannot have happen is get infected again with any respiratory illness. And so even if COVID were to go away tomorrow, which it will not, we have RSV, we have flu, the rates are getting ever higher. We have like mystery pneumonia, right? Like we're in this time now where we have these tools that are available that will enable everyone to be able to show up. And if they're sick, right? People who are sick should be able to, or if they're in the assisted living facility or, you know, or in the hospital, these are also stories I heard, they should all be able to vote too. And so I think just really being intentional about planning, like, what's our plan B for this? What's our plan C for this, right? And making sure that those are offered to folks without even waiting for them to ask for it.
Well, I think we have maybe a couple minutes left if there's one additional question. All right, Brian, go ahead.
One of the concerns that I've heard and read is that people still like, town meeting. They like the tradition of it, etc. From what I understand, adopting voting by Australian ballot does not necessarily preclude having a town meeting as well. Is that correct?
That might be a question more for Jessica. We'll have her in the next section if you want to ask that again.
Okay.
Any others for Kate about disability related?
I'll just, concluding thoughts, I'll just share that, the civil rights movement as a whole, in the United States since forever, but especially starting in the 60s onward. If at any point a small group of people were to have said, we could have civil rights, or we can keep to tradition, tradition would have never allowed for full inclusion ever. There's not a single tradition, if you go back in history, that it's like, you know what, that was actually quite accessible. That would have allowed for somebody's civil rights. And so it is really hard, particularly for smaller towns, particularly for beloved traditions, to be changed in the name of equity, in the name of diversity, in the name of inclusion. And yet it's still the right thing to do in those cases.
That's a wonderful way to end the conversation. Thank you, Kate, for
Thank you all
coming
so
tonight and for sharing this important perspective. I hope you have given other people a new perspective on it. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Let's see. The committee, let's see, next on our agenda, the committee will now like to take some time, hopefully, if Jessica and John are available, to ask some questions. I'd like to start by sharing my screen with Jericho's town meeting turnout statistics for the last 10 years. So let me just share. Can everyone see that okay? All right, thumbs up. So I put together this table by going to the Secretary of State's turnout results. They have a nice page there. And I put it, this is all just for Jericho for the last 10 years, 2013 to 2023. The table shows how many Jericho voters turned out for the floor vote and how many submitted a ballot each year. I decided to look only at the numbers for the 8 years prior to the pandemic period only, so we can compare apples to apples. I've made two main observations with this table. The first being that the average attendance for the in-person floor vote is 269 people, or 6.64% of registered voters. Whereas the average number of people who submitted a ballot is 1,069, or 26.38% of registered voters. The second observation I made was that even in presidential election years, 2016 and 2020, when approximately 2,000 or half the percentage of registered voters in Jericho submitted a ballot, you can see here in 2000 and 1950, the number of people who attended the floor vote remained the same and did not increase. So one question I'm curious about, I'm not sure if Jessica or John would know this, but how is the number of people who vote from the floor calculated? And is there a verification system to determine if they are a registered voter from Jericho? Like when people vote at the polls, there's a master list that's checked off before a ballot's given out. Is there something similar done for the floor vote?
So I can answer that. Can you hear me?
Yes. thank you.
Okay, great. So the floor vote total, it depends on if someone at town meeting asks for a vote by division as opposed to a vote by voice, and then there's a show of hands and the hands get counted. And so we know the ayes and nays, and then if there were abstentions prior at the beginning of town meeting, and I don't know if he does it prior to the vote, but the town moderator reminds people that if they're not a citizen of Jericho or a resident, that they should not be voting. And we do have some school groups that attend, so they're younger than 18, and they don't participate in the voice vote, but we do not put them in a separate section. There are some towns that do, but in Jericho, it's partly the preference of the moderator that people can sit where they want. And then if there is not a vote by division on the floor, it's really just an estimate. So I'm actually the one who submits those floor vote totals, and it's just an estimate. There is no actual count.
And so there's no like sign-in system either. There's nothing that people sign when they get there.
No, and some people come, midstream, or they just stay for one article, so there's a lot of coming and going. Some people are out in the hallway chatting and then they come back in.
How does
So-
that feel to you from a standpoint of voter fraud? I'm just curious.
I think I generally know everyone that's in the building, like I've met them before. So I think I have a high confidence that it is Jericho people that are attending. Yeah, I'm not aware that someone would sabotage the meeting.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I know we seem to spend a lot of time making sure people who submit a ballot are, registered voters. So I was just curious if that carried over to the town budget votes too. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Looking through the comment here, I'm going to take it. I don't think we need to share the screen now. So I was just wanting to show the numbers to everyone. Jericho residents who attend the town meeting really like the face-to-face discussion aspect of town meeting. If voting was moved to Australian ballot, what options would residents have if they would like to let the select board know areas of the town budget they'd like to see adjusted? Or is there like a public comment period or a special meeting that could happen for those people?
So prior to COVID, and then especially during COVID, there were opportunities. Well, even before the informational budget meetings, it's September, October, November, when the budget's getting planned is when people should be giving input or feedback. And in the past, there has been select board meetings warned that say, we're going to be talking about this piece of the budget or something. And I don't know if it has to do with how things get advertised, but there is not a lot of public input into the information, into those budget planning meetings. And I know at the school level, they sent out a postcard for everyone to attend. I think it was like November 16th, but I did not attend, so I don't know. But I have attended those meetings in the past, and that's actually 5 towns. So it's a lot of people that are being represented in that budget. And I would tell you there's less than 20 people in the room or, virtual.
Yeah, I do wonder if that comes down to just advertising or, people not interested in attending, or it sounds like if there was reading the survey results, it sounds like if there was an alternative to being able to come together and discuss it before, like an Australian ballot, people did indicate interest in that. So I think maybe that could be an alternative. Another thing that I noticed with the survey results is that residents who attend the town meeting are concerned that moving away from floor votes will result in a less informed electorate. I've spoken with Angelique, is it, from Mount Mansfield Community TV, and I've seen all the great work she's done recording meetings and info sessions for the public. And like her, I feel it's important to encourage participation before town meeting, like we're talking about. Do you have any indication why you think attendees believe they are better informed because of the in-person discussion? And could a hybrid informational meeting before the vote with the ballot help alleviate those concerns? Would you like to take that one, John?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was just clearing my throat. So I'm having a hard time, honestly, following the line of inquiry around giving input on the town budget. So, are you talking immediately in advance of town meeting, the budget as it appears in the town report? Are you talking preamble to getting to a final draft of the budget? What effort is made to get input from townspeople, Maria?
Well, I think what I'm seeing from the survey results is that they like the in-person discussion, being able to go by line through the budget and being able to make amendments to it. And I'm just wondering, is that a process where they could not necessarily make an amendment, but have a meeting with the select board, send an email, have some sort of hybrid informational meeting where before the budget is finalized, where they could say, hey, I would like the librarian position to be full-time, not part-time, and I want to allot this many dollars to it.
So I may either have to defer to or include Jessica in my response. So in my relatively limited window of responsibility for facilitating the development of the budget and going through the public hearing process with the select board. So we typically solicit budget input from committees, departments within the town. We have a number of community partnership organizations that receive annual funding. We reach out to them to confirm what their allocation is going to be. And then the select board and our administrative team, well, I'll start off by saying our administrative team usually puts together a sort of a structural budget as a first draft, just inputting everything that we know. And typically when that process starts in the fall, we may or may not even have actual expenditure data from the previous fiscal year because we're waiting for our audit to be complete. And then that really holding up the historical snapshot of allocation and expenditure is really what drives the discussion about needed funding for any specific fiscal year. So yeah, at that point, it is interesting because I get very little by way of inquiry, and I don't really see I don't know how like a public budget build would work, honestly. I think it would be really difficult to manage, which is why the opportunity for people to vote, which is why we have a number of public hearings so that the select board can get feedback on what is proposed to go to vote on town meeting day. And the example that you used, obviously there can be amendments suggested on the floor. So that's sort of the ultimate, that's kind of the sword that the public has, if you will, but not much, honestly, prior to that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? And I don't even know if it's a clarifying question, but
Sure.
it might muddle things. So I think Sabina and I were talking about this, and we were just sort of wondering, okay, well, so like if you try to replicate that public ability to amend the budget, but you remove it from that, 3-hour time period, and you put it into the time that goes all the ability, excuse me, I'm not being too articulate. Let me start over again. People have the opportunity to amend the budget as during those public hearings.
No.
And then those amendments appear on a ballot. Now I haven't, rather than being spoken and having a floor vote, those amendments from the public become part of the Australian ballot.
They can make, I wouldn't say, so during those public hearings, the select board can take feedback and recommendations on changes to be made. But at that point, I believe the budget can't be changed again until town meeting.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right? So like the power of town meeting is that you get, even if the select board didn't agree with your idea when you presented it during the public hearing,
Right.
you as a resident can get your fellow residents to vote on your idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We saw it happen last spring. It was
Right.
quite a sight to behold.
So could that happen? And I guess it depends, like how much time do you need to print ballots? Can that happen as an amendment process? So I go to the public hearing. I want my amendment to be on the ballot for giving the road crew raises.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not that I want the select board to consider that. I want that as an amendment on the ballot.
I'm not sure, Wendy, I'm not sure what you mean by an amendment on the ballot. You can put it to the floor for a vote at town meeting.
Well, I'm saying if we don't have floor votes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right? In this alternative universe.
Mm.
So I can see where that could get totally unwieldy, and I'm just trying to think outside of the box.
Yeah, I don't.
And would that even be possible? I guess, for you, Jessica, like how long do you need to print ballots? Like it feels.
So the school budget is voted yes or no. That's the only option on the ballot. And there was one year where it got voted down, I believe, 2, maybe 3 times in a row. So there was a vote in March, and then there was a vote mid-April, there was a vote in May, and then there was a vote in June. And the school had to revert back to the previous year's budget as an operating budget until they had a budget that was passed. But there wasn't specific yes, no amendments to the budget. There were meetings, obviously, where people could give input, but it was just a number that was on the ballot.
Yeah, and
it was the whole ballot. It wasn't a specific amendment question.
Yeah, and Jessica, I'll defer to you. Statutorily, I don't think I understand whether that's even possible or not at this point.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's possible, but it's maybe something that could go, you know, it wouldn't be happening this year, but it would be like, I think, Wendy, what you're saying is, you know, people can give input into the budget in the fall. Once the town report is printed in the budget that is accepted by the select board, there are informational hearings before town meeting. I think there's 2, but that's just based on what's printed in the town report. People have a chance to digest the town report. They make amendments at town meeting, and currently those amendments are voted on the floor. And I think Wendy's question was, could we have town meeting in March? And then if there were amendments, maybe they need to be a specific dollar change, you know, like maybe there could be some, so that would be a separate election. And so generally we're using Mount Mansfield Union High School, so we would have to, you know, make agreements with them to know, well, we have town meeting in March, and then we're going to have another election come April or May to vote on the amendments.
So
I think my missing piece of like my lack of understanding is that what is on the ballot needs to be printed in the town plan,
In the town report.
in the town report. So whatever is going to be on that ballot has to
Correct.
be has to be published in the town report.
47 days ahead, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the statutory piece. The other thing, though, and I think this aligns with your kind of path of inquiry, Wendy, is, and I think you know, most of you know this, we being the select board and I at any given meeting get asked for budget funding that weren't budgeted either during budget planning or prior to the vote taking place at town meeting. Like for instance, we have this coming Thursday, the Jericho Underhill Land Trust, who's been working with the Davis Farm on a long-term conservation, to secure a long-term conservation easement, is going to be asking for approval of $35,000 of funding from the Conservation Reserve Fund to be committed to that effort. So again, whether it's something like that, or whether you decided to come to a select board meeting, get on the agenda and ask for on the record for the select board to approve a salary increase for, you know, any of the town staff, I don't know. I don't see anything preventing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to see, if there is an alternative option that if you said to someone, you know, well, yes, if we switch to Australian ballot, you can no longer make amendments from the floor. But at this point of the creation for the budget period, you know, at this point in time, if you went to a select board meeting or something, if there was something that you really cared about and you wanted to make or have some sort of influence or ask them to budget for it, this is the time and the place to do it. You know what I mean? Is there an alternative, a viable alternative option that we could sort of let people know about? And honestly, I mean, it really does come down to however the select board wants to do it. But it's just something that comes up, you know, in the survey results and when talking with people, that's the main concern. And I was just wondering if there's a way that we could talk about it, or if there's any talking points we could have to say, well, yes, you can't do it this way, but as an alternative, you could possibly do this. And then everybody gets to vote on the budget via Australian ballot. So everyone gets, you know, to vote in the end for the budget.
Yeah, I think, there are plenty of opportunities, it sounds like, for folks to provide input and to make requests. And town meeting is the only opportunity, I think, for the voters to really take it out of the select board's hands. So every time you're making a request or making a suggestion, the select board is making the decision whether or not to include it in the budget or not. Once you get to that floor vote, now all of a sudden you can make an amendment, and it doesn't matter what the select board wants to do or not want to do. It's the people in that room that get to decide. And so even though there are plenty of avenues for input, that ability to kind of veto the select board is not possible without the floor vote at town meeting, and with all of the caveats that we all are discussing here. But I think that's what I'm hearing, that's what I'm understanding, and that's what we're losing.
Right, and may not be representative of the registered voter electorate,
Right.
right? Which is,
Exactly.
to me, that was totally mind blowing.
I mean, I've never
300 people can, propose a change, and we didn't even,
Nobody hears about it.
ironically,
Yeah.
the funds for those positions are funds that live within the town library that the town just sort of manages. We had no idea if those funds were even available, or like we were talking about creating a position at, this, we were totally guessing on what the total amount should be, because we didn't know how much insurance was going to be. It's not like we've got our computers in front of us doing all the calculating, nor would it be appropriate for us to be doing that work on behalf of a group of voters trying to put an amendment on the floor. It was really, really
Is-
interesting.
my very first town meeting, and I am an election nerd, and
Yeah.
this was the very first town meeting I was ever able to attend, and it was mind blowing to me that there were so many aspects of it that were the only thing I can think of, Maria, though, to get at your question too, is that it's kind of old school, or maybe new school if town meeting is old school, but is organizing a group of people and campaigning to say vote no on the budget, because they did not take this this input into account. If there was a real, it's not like people are completely powerless if we take the floor vote away and that ability to amend on the floor away, but it is a much lengthier and more complicated process that requires much more
That's a good
community
point.
organizing.
There's always, the public eventually, in the end, could have their say that way. So
Yeah, if we went to every single public hearing they had, we asked them to make the librarian a full-time position. It's not on this budget. Everybody vote no on this budget and send a message to the select board that we want a new budget. That would be the alternative, I think.
Well, good. In the interest
question.
of moving the conversation along. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
That's okay. I was wondering, traditionally, the decision is made on the budget at town meeting, but does it have to be? What's the deadline to decide on the budget? Is there like a state deadline, or how does that work?
That would be, I don't know, Jessica, I don't know the answer to that question.
So the annual town meeting date is set in statute, like it's always been the first Tuesday in March, or the statute allows that 3 days before, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. But what happens is if you if you leave town meeting without an operating budget, that does mess things up as far as trying to calculate the tax rate for the coming year. So we're voting on a fiscal year starting in June. So if there isn't a budget that's passed before June 30th, you're operating on, you're still spending money, but you don't have a approved budget.
But is there a statute saying that it has to be that Tuesday, that first Tuesday of March, or can it
Yeah,
be?
town meeting is identified in the statute unless your town has a charter that changes town meeting. So I think South Burlington and the Village of Essex, they vote the first Tuesday in April.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you for having this discussion. I think that was really helpful. I've talked with Jessica a little bit about this, but I was hoping, Jessica, for the sake of the committee, would you mind just explaining the options available to us to add a question to March's town meeting ballot and the process required to do that?
So if there was an article on the town meeting warning to change voting on the budget to an Australian ballot, if it passed at town meeting, it wouldn't take effect until the next year. And there is an opportunity to either petition the article to be on the town meeting warning, or the select board is meeting this Thursday, and I don't know if you're already on the agenda for that. You can ask them if that article can go on without a petition, or if 5% of the voters are needing to sign up the petition, or if 10% are needing to sign the petition.
And it looks like that we might, in order to move all the votes that take place on the floor, we might have to ask two different questions.
It would be two articles, but I did get confirmed today from the Secretary of State's office that both articles could show up on the same petition. So you would just be collecting signatures, on a combined petition. But I don't have any input from the town attorney yet. And I think that would come after a select board meeting if they were seeking, just to have the town attorney confirm that that's
So
the
maybe
wording of the petition.
if we were to approach the select board, that might be an ask that we should make to make sure that the wording on the petition should be this and this, which is one of the articles, just so everybody knows, is shall we move all town articles to Australian ballot? And then the other question or article is, shall we move all public questions to Australian ballot? In order to get all the questions from town meeting floor votes onto Australian ballot. That's what it would take, because we already have the school budget that's voted on by Australian ballot. And out of curiosity, or just to confirm, if we petition the select board and we get the 10% needed, the 430 some odd names, that question, those questions, those go on the Australian ballot, right? They're not voted on the floor, right? On March.
Articles that you would be petitioning,
Sorry?
those two articles, is the budget going to be voted by Australian ballot, and there's all yes, no questions, those would be voted on the floor at town meeting. So it would be a voice vote.
Oh, so it won't go on the Australian ballot. It won't.
Not until Jericho changes, not until Jericho changes to vote yes, no questions by ballot.
So in order to have that pass successfully, we would have to organize people to show up to town meeting. They couldn't vote via the Australian ballot on that article.
So the people who can't access town meeting can't vote on whether or not.
Yeah, that's a little nuts. And I know you all don't make the rules, But talk about a selection bias of voters.
And that makes me very unhappy because
Wow, I didn't realize that. I thought that that would be on a ballot, on an Australian ballot. Wow.
now
Well,
you're
if
trying
they-
to convince the 2,000 that normally submit a ballot in a presidential election year, which is a presidential election year, they have to show up for 4 or 5 hours in order to get this to pass.
So last year I was at the school meeting, which is generally in February prior to the voting on the budget. So the school meeting sort of had two parts to it. One was they elected their officers on the floor and they voted yes, no questions on the floor, but then they voted their budget by ballot the same day in all 5 towns, that first Tuesday in March. So at that annual meeting in February, there was literally 10 people in the room that passed it to vote officers, by ballot as opposed to voting them on the floor.
And there's nothing you can put within the petition or to the select board that you want it to appear on the Australian ballot in March, not as a core vote.
Yeah, the only way would be to petition to have a special meeting prior to town meeting, which again would be a voice vote to ask, do you want to vote public yes, no questions by ballot? And then it would come into effect for March.
Really tragic.
So, and with that vote, like allowing yes, no questions by ballot, then that would become all kinds of yes, no questions by ballot, not just what we're proposing here? Or is that asked just specific to what we're trying to do?
You mean specific to annual town meeting?
Yeah, or would the select board or would this vote that says allow articles that have yes, no questions, I'm sorry, I'm not using the right language, be permissible by ballot voting? Like, so from here on out, whenever Jericho wanted to have a yes, no vote, it could be on an Australian ballot.
Yeah, I think it would be changing for everything, but I think there also is that option to be specific
Okay,
to the specific question. And I'm thinking of Underhill, they vote their budget on the floor, but they do vote yes, no questions by ballot. So I actually haven't seen a town meeting ballot for Underhill. It would be interesting to look at a sample ballot to see if what kind of yes, no questions show up on the ballot that aren't budget related.
so say if we're going to take a little bit more of a long game with this. I'm not saying that that's what we want to do, but I'm just trying to get timelines in my head. So it seems like getting having the ability to have a yes, no question on a ballot is pretty key from my perspective. Otherwise, we're just going to have those people that can attend town meeting voting on the floor. And I think that would be a lot harder to overcome that obstacle. What could it be that we have, we petition for getting yes, no questions on the ballot, like this, for this 2023 town meeting? And then for the 2024 town meeting, we petitioned for, no, wait, we already had so we petitioned for 2024 to have the ability to have yes, no ballots on, yes, no questions on a physical ballot. And then on 2025, we petitioned to move to Australian ballot for town budget.
Honestly, I think you're probably going to have, well, I'm not sure how you want to look at it, but I think if you are able to get enough people in the room to support moving to Australian ballot, having them to have to do it 2 years in a row, I think it's going to be harder than trying to do it in 1 year. You know what I mean? Like, so the two questions are, and I'm not, maybe I'm confused by what yes, no is, but I think it's town budget related articles and public questions, or is there something additional to yes, no? Is yes, no the public questions?
Yes.
Yes, no is the public questions. So
Right.
I'm just wondering if, say we said we got 1,000 people this year to show up to the town meeting to vote on yes, nos. That means we have to get another. Are you,
No, because what Wendy is saying is that then when we make the big ask, which is, do you want to go to Australian ballot for the budget? Because that's a yes, no question. And the year before we got the yes, nos passed. Now that's not a floor vote. That's an Australian ballot question. So everybody gets to vote on whether the budget is Australian ballot or not. Is that what you're saying, Wendy? Yeah. Because
that's
that's
what-
the harder, that's
Hard to
going to be
sell.
the harder sell.
Yeah.
interesting, okay. I like strategic thinking like that, that's very good. Any other questions for Jessica or John?
Jessica, you are one of my like town heroes. You are my favorite, my all-time favorite. I love the town clerk. Anyway, I just had to fangirl for a second in front of people just to embarrass you. Do you know how many people the auditorium fits at MMU?
It might be 350. There
Okay.
is a specific capacity. I'd have to get that from
I mean, I was just curious. Okay.
the
I was
potential
thinking,
is like for graduation, how they live stream into the gym, or right now we only have permission to use the auditorium because there are sports that happen during school vacation week, so it's a bigger ask for the gymnasium and then set up and all that. But
Gotcha.
MMCTV Angelique, she was saying the tech support there at the high school is awesome, or actually within the district. And they have the capability to broadcast to screens, throughout the school. And you would have to get involved prior to their school vacation the week before town meeting. But I think there could be a bigger ask there to have, more assistance from technology to allow, like they were talking about the Cambridge solution of someone needing a separate room, that's potential. I think having everyone in the same building is certainly easier. I know during COVID, the select board had considered having a hybrid meeting, or I guess I think it was hybrid because I don't know exactly, but it was like either be all Zoom or all in person. Like it's very difficult for the moderator to moderate a hybrid meeting, or it's more difficult to moderate a hybrid meeting. But like they talked about having runners, going back and forth. And I think it's 7 people need to stand up during the discussion if they want the vote to be a paper ballot. Any question like on an amendment or whatever, someone can ask for it to be a paper ballot. They can ask for a division, so then that's a show of hands, but they can also ask for a paper ballot, and that allows the secrecy of the vote. And so if that happens, I've only seen it happen when we were at the elementary school. I haven't seen it happen.
So you could technically request a paper ballot for the yes, no vote.
At the time,
At the
yeah,
town
so
meeting.
the meeting sort of gets suspended and then everyone files through the voting area to cast a yes, no ballot.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing. Okay, well, you have given us a lot of food for thought, that's for sure. I appreciate it. Would you like to go over the survey results, SJ?
Sure.
Actually, I have one thought. I was, sort of processing Wendy's 2-year approach. In one sense, it wouldn't be a bad idea, to have the discussion at town meeting, because it would certainly get out ideas and, people can be learning throughout the year, so if it didn't pass, voting it down once doesn't mean that it won't pass the following year. Like it might get people thinking, and other towns, might be showing more creative responses. I think it's Brattleboro has a representative town meeting format, which I'm not that familiar with, but I don't know how they decide the regions of the who the representatives are, but they sort of hash out the budget. So it's a smaller group of people, but you're giving your input to a representative as opposed to giving your input to a select board member. So there would be the potential to, sway the floor.
Out of
And I think Craftsberry is currently, they're looking at democracy and looking at creative solutions.
Out of curiosity, is the timing of the meeting able to be, flexible for this town meeting? Like, if you wanted to advocate for it to be in the evening or on the weekend, is that available, or is that something that also needs to be petitioned?
Do you mean timing but 9 o'clock, or a timing on a different day?
A different day, different time, like what, Tuesday evening, Saturday afternoon? Is that something that the select board decides? How does that get decided?
I think the voters at town meeting do. So I think that it would actually be an article on the warning to change it for the following year.
Okay, yeah.
And that has happened before. And then I think they switch back.
And so it is somewhere specific saying it has to start at 9 and go until it's done.
I can double check that. 9 a.m. start.
All right. You ready, SJ? Just so you know you're on.
You're muted, SJ. But you know that, okay.
As long as she knows it, that's all that matters.
All right, can you guys see that?
Sure can.
Okay, so these are the survey results from the town meeting survey that you all put together. Sabina did a super fast turnaround on this, which is awesome. And Maria and Wendy, I think you did a lot of the heavy lifting too and putting the questions together. So the survey ran for about a month, for the month of November, and we had 72 responses, which is actually pretty good. Just as a reminder for folks that, you know, surveys are a snapshot in time, and only represent the folks who took the time and were motivated enough to answer the survey. So it's definitely useful information and helpful to understand how our neighbors are thinking about the questions that we pose to them, but just keep that in mind. But 72 folks, which is pretty good. So first question was, I regularly attend town meeting in person to vote on the town budget. For most of for all of these, your colors are going to be the same. So strongly disagree is in green, disagree is in yellow, purple is always neutral, pink is agree, and blue is strongly agree. So hold on a second here. So 21% of respondents, which is about 15 folks, said that they strongly agreed with the statement that they regularly attend town meeting. 12.5% agreed with the statement. Most people either disagreed or disagreed strongly about regularly attending town meeting, which I think bears out with the data that Maria shared, and anecdotally, I think we can all kind of are unsurprised by that. When was the last year you attended town meeting? 37.5% of the folks who responded said that they had never attended a town meeting. Only about 28% said that they had attended the 2023 meeting. Like 18% had attended a meeting, but not since prior to 2018. And these numbers here are small, but this is pink is 2018, purple is 2019, and yellow is 2020. It's difficult for me to attend town meeting day in person. So a majority of the respondents either strongly agreed or agreed with that statement. Almost 40% strongly agreed that it's difficult to attend. About 10% didn't feel one way or the other about it. And what is that? About 35% disagreed or strongly disagreed. We asked them if it's difficult to attend town meeting in person, indicate why, and we gave them some potential responses. Note here that only 50 of the 72 survey responders actually answered this question. And also note that they could check all that apply. So these numbers, for instance, aren't going to add to 50 because some people checked more than one option. So 39 out of the 50 cited work responsibilities as the reason that they couldn't attend or found it difficult. 4 said a lack of childcare, 3 said a disability, and 13 folks said other. And when we offered them a free text field and asked why, or what is the other, 4 of them said something along the lines of care or responsibility for family, for pets, household kind of thing. One person just said it's at a bad time for me. One person said it's not difficult at all to attend. One person said that they were a poll worker, and so they're in a separate room during their shift. Their poll shift is during town meeting, and so they aren't able to attend for that reason. COVID risk. Someone just said it's an enormous time commitment, which it absolutely is. Someone else said appointments. One person said I'm uncomfortable speaking in public. And another one kind of reiterating the work responsibilities said that in order to attend, they'd have to take a vacation day. Overwhelmingly here, a majority of the folks who responded to this either strongly agreed or agreed with the statement, I am more likely to vote on town articles and the budget if I could vote by Australian ballot. 11% felt neutral about that statement. And then 16% either disagreed or disagreed strongly. Voting by Australian ballot for all articles, including the town budget, would negatively impact Jericho's democratic process. So kind of the flip of that. And again, we see about 70%. So what is that? 51 and 18. So 69% disagree or disagree strongly with that statement. About 17% felt neutral, and the rest agree or strongly agree that Australian ballot would negatively impact Jericho's democratic process. When you ask, Australian ballot would provide greater access to town decision-making for those who are unable to attend town meeting. 90% agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. And these numbers are so small here, I apologize. So 3 people, which is about 4%, strongly disagreed. 1 person, which is 1.4%, disagreed, and then 4% felt neutral about that statement. So then we asked, so what are your concerns, if any, about voting for the budget by Australian ballot? And there are quite a few responses. I shared those responses with committee members, and I think that we can certainly make them public on the website as long as some of them have some identifying information that we may want to take out. But I tried to bucket the responses. Most people, the most common answers to this question, the most common concerns were that the people who were voting would be less informed, that the floor vote and the discussion that happens there really provides a lot of context, that folks appreciate hearing the multiple sides of a vote and before they vote. So they like kind of hearing the opinions of their neighbors. There was one comment that was quote unquote authentication of voter. And I started just because I wasn't sure if that fits here, because like Maria pointed out earlier, authentication of a voter happens with Australian ballot, at least more rigorously, let's say, than the floor vote. Would miss discussion, hearing all sides, finding consensus. That was a theme that came up a couple of times. The idea that having discussion on the floor and having a back and forth allowed folks to kind of come to a consensus instead of pitting, us versus them, and this kind of dichotomous situation. Another big one that was repeated multiple times was the inability to amend the budget and articles prior to voting, which I think we've all just discussed. One person asked, so what happens if a budget doesn't pass? Do we then have to have a special election? And like, what does that process looks like? The suggestion there being, I think that with this, we're guaranteed, well, we're more likely to be assured of having a passed budget at the end of town meeting day. Whereas if we went to Australian ballot, there'd be a chance that we didn't. And then what does that look like? Someone mentioned the burden on volunteers of counting ballots. Many people who completed the survey said that they had no concerns about voting for the budget by the Australian ballot. And then the last was a concern that Australian ballot would result in less citizen engagement. That I think because, again, there's this discussion back and forth, and it feels like a real active participation in democracy, and a real engaging process, and that may not only there, but that may also kind of bleed into just feeling engaged in the community overall. And then I just pulled this quote. Again, there were many here that I tried to bucket, but this quote I think kind of encompassed a lot of the sentiments of people who had concerns. It feels like one more step towards not talking to our neighbors. There's something about getting together once a year to conduct business face to face that I'll mourn if we do away with it. We then asked, what are the benefits, if any, about voting for the budget by Australian ballot? Many responses that had to do with more participation and representation. Lots of responses about Australian ballot being more inclusive and more equitable. Australian ballot being easier and saving time, both I think for the voters and for the town and election officials. Privacy of vote, more time to do research before voting, which I understand what they're saying, and I think that what they're referring to here is because some things can come up on the floor that you aren't then able to research in real time and have to take a vote on. I think that's what they're referring to there. The possibility of voting by mail or absentee ballots. Town matters not being decided by the loudest voices. This was a theme that came up a couple of times. And then interestingly, more citizen engagement. And I think, and I shouldn't speak for people, I should probably have pulled out the specific quotes, but my guess here is that more citizen engagement because it does feel real crummy to not be able to vote on these things. There is kind of a voter respect and a pride that comes with voting for things like the budget. And if I know that I'm not going to get to vote on the budget, then why would I read it line by line when I'm preparing to cast my ballot? So I just thought that was an interesting. And then I just pulled one. There were lots. This person said greater participation and less chance of a few people adding spend items to the budget with very little oversight. That idea that there's either the loudest voices, the bullies in the room, or just a small handful of people making decisions for the entire town. And then lastly, Maria pulled 4 quotes from the final question, which was kind of any information regarding participating in town meeting that we didn't ask you about that you wanted to share. And I will read these briefly. I've attended most years since it was held in the town room in the basement of the Congregational Church in Jericho Center, taking vacation days if needed. Today's venue is handicap accessible, so the meeting is not accessible to only a very few of those who have an interest in attending. So the issue is, do we take away the rights of the many to make amendments from the floor in order to enhance the rights of the very few who are so handicapped they cannot access a handicap accessible facility? Sad that this is a choice we need to make, but in the end, not that difficult. We should not change town meeting to take away the majority's rights in order to accommodate those few who just want to preserve their vacation days. Another respondent, if we move to an Australian ballot, my recommendation, a required discussion or presentation about any item typically covered during the town meeting must be addressed in a separate meeting available to everybody. Example, the school budget presentation. That could lead to multiple evening discussions or presentations and add costs to the town administration. It could also be a hybrid meeting with the ability to send questions or concerns before the meeting, and the whole session is recorded for later viewing. Another person, the past year, 2023, the town meeting was just painful. It was basically over before noon, but then a whole lot of items came up that pushed it to what, 2 p.m. or later? I finally had to just stand up and leave when I could no longer delay going back to work. Whenever an item comes up that asks the town to take a stand on something, everyone in the town should have the ability to vote, not just those that attend town meeting. This is especially true when a new item comes off the floor for the first time and citizens don't even know it's coming, except for those who are part of the group that's sponsoring it, thus making it easier for an unpopular decision to be voted at town hall and passing. Anytime the town is asked to take a position, aka virtue signaling, then it should only be allowed by Australian ballot, either as part of the town meeting items or in a special election. By the way, I know that Jericho has tried for Saturday meetings in the past, and those were also spectacular failures. Same for evening meetings. No matter what time you schedule a meeting, someone is working, someone has childcare, someone has elder care, someone is sick, etc. So to be fully inclusive, since it's the DEI committee that's pushing for this, then we need Australian ballot. And the last one is a quick one. I've always wanted to attend town meeting, but have never been able. I hope it stays as a way to get community together and is supplemented by Australian ballot. It would also be nice if there was an evening forum for townspeople to discuss issues similar to town meeting.
Thank you so much for taking us through that, SJ. The reason why I chose those 4 quotes is just because I think it shows you the full range of some of the feeling in our town. You know, some people that are totally for Australian, some people who are totally for in person, and some people have attended in person and don't think it's a very good process. So I think that really does give a nice range of how people feel about town meeting. So now, I guess we could open this up to discussion to the committee. Well, actually, no, I skipped over public comment in town meeting. If there's anyone from the public that would like to add anything to the discussion, we would be happy to take public comment now. Do we have just one member attending from the public? So if you would like to say anything, you're welcome to do so now. Okay, so I think I'd like to open a discussion now to the DEI committee members. I'd love to hear, you guys have been so patient and attentive. I'd love to hear what you'd like to share about town meeting and what you're thinking. Would it be helpful if I choose names, or would you like to just raise a hand and go? Ryan, I see you are unmuted. Would you like to go first?
Okay. Just based on the survey results, and I know that's a limited sample, but it seems that the majority of people favor, you know, greater participation and Australian ballot voting.
And how do you feel about it?
Yeah. It's funny because some of the people who seem to be, or who are defending the town meeting format, seem to be talking about democracy, but it is not really democratic if the majority of people are not taking part in the process.
Wendy, you're next to Brian on my screen. Would you like to go next? Or would you like to say anything, I should say?
I'd like to talk to other towns that have town budget on Australian ballot and see how they have resolved some of these. And maybe they haven't resolved. Maybe they've just kind of embraced this a change. But I'm just really curious about how they passed the process, how they've transitioned to Australian ballot. Are they seeing greater participation, greater voter turnout? So that's on my mind. I am supportive of moving to Australian ballot. And I would like in a conversation to the select board, I would like to have a better sense of what, I don't want them to have to figure it out. Like, I don't want to say, this is a great idea, now you figure out how to do it. I would want to be more informed about saying, this is a great idea, here's how we could do it. So right now I don't have a strong sense of the how, I guess, or how we can still retain some of the public participation that we do see in town meeting, like for better or for worse, we do get people participating in a more detailed, engaged way than perhaps they get people attending their Thursday night meetings when they're presenting their budget. Like, people show up, people show evidence of reading it line by line. So like, just how can we get the best of both? And maybe it's not possible, but I just would like, I'm just really curious to talk to towns that are similar to Jericho that have already made the switch. But I am supportive of moving to Australian ballot.
Got it. Would you like to share some thoughts?
See what people that were against it, to see or how that would go over. I'm gonna try to attend a town meeting this year, since I'll be 18. I can vote on things, so it'll be cool to see the range of opinions and thoughts that can be shared, especially with accessible voting.
Missed the beginning of that a little bit, but I think, were you trying to say that you think we should add the question so that there is a discussion at town meeting about it and see how that discussion goes? Is that what you were trying to say? Yeah. Thank you. Nathan, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I can't say I'm exactly a experienced voter, so I don't have like the personal connections, but seems like it's more convenient for people and more accessible. I really liked how Kate in the beginning in their presentation, they said like that the tradition's like all about the community, and I mean, doing something that the community can access is essentially what Australian ballot does. So I think it's good in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you. SJ, what are your feelings?
I think this was a really helpful discussion for a lot of reasons. One of them being that again, I had never attended a town meeting until last year, and having attended one, I understand a little bit of why folks hold it so dear. I think the idea of it and the experience for those who are able to fully participate is a really special one, and is really, I can see, really empowering, and I could understand feeling really protective of it. And this question about participation, and a little bit along the lines of what Wendy is asking, is an interesting one. You know, I mean, the select board does have multiple warned hearings. They are soliciting input. They are going through that budget line by line to an empty room. And so, you know, how much of the participation that we see at town meeting day, how much of that is really is because of the tradition of it all, because the whole town is doing it. Even though, you know, we don't get the day off work and there are a lot of accessibility issues, just the fact that the whole state is participating in this one day, that expectation is there. Is that part of why we're getting that participation? And, you know, forget the amendments, but there's no way that we're going to be able to recreate that or supplement that. All of that said, as magical as it was, I was so shocked at how decisions are made and by how many. And as I found myself as a 41-year-old woman who's, you know, fairly successful in getting up and talking at public meetings all the time, did not feel comfortable asking some of the questions I had, did not feel comfortable voting the way that I was voting in some of those votes, because it was public and because it was rowdy. And again, I'm a really involved citizen and a resident of Jericho, and that was my first meeting. So I am on board. I think that Australian ballot is probably the way to go, but it's a sticky, thorny issue for a reason.
So thank you for sharing that, everyone. Obviously, my opinion is that switching to Australian ballot would make it possible for me to vote. And I think that's a really important thing. As like Kate says, if just one person can't vote, isn't that the important thing? So I think switching to Australian ballot not only addresses the needs of those who have access challenges, but it also promotes inclusivity and ensures the voices of all community members are heard and considered. And I strongly support petitioning the select board and letting voters make the final decision in March. Hearing that might be a bigger hill to climb in March now. I was hoping it was going to be put on the Australian ballot. It will take a lot of time and effort from people who really want to see this happen. So I don't know if that's something this committee is ready to take on. First off, we would have to meet with the town select board on Thursday. Ask them if they would add it to the meeting. I have a feeling because this is such a big topic, they might say no, and they're going to say you have to go for the 10% signatures requirement. So that's getting over 400 signatures. We would have to do that and submit that by middle of January to the town clerk's office. So that's one chunk of what we would have to do. And then we would have,
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
sure.
But Jessica, you at one point you said there was sometimes you need 5%, sometimes you need 10%. What's the criteria for that 5 or 10?
So if you go to the website, there's under town documents, there's clerk documents, and then the second one down is election town meeting day documents. And there's one called the 10% threshold. And that was a select board meeting, a motion that was made at a select board meeting back in 2007 about the select board would waive their discretion if the motion would be put on, if the article would be put on the ballot, if the petitioners had 10% of the ballot, or 10% of the voters signing the petition. And the biggest discretion I think that the town select board uses is if it pertains to town business or not, because anyone could ask for any yes, no question, you know, to be an article on town meeting, and the select board's response would be, well, if you get 10% of the voters to want that to be a question on town meeting, or not, the petitioner, the people signing the petition would just be saying, yes, they want the article on the meeting. They're not saying yes or no about the article. So that was actually made in 2007. And I actually asked the question to Catherine McMains, the select board chair. The people that made that motion are no longer on the select board, you know, so is that the current, is that, you know, the current thing? So that would be at this Thursday's meeting, something to ask, but I think this would seriously be considered town, you know, relating to town meeting business. So I don't think the 10% threshold would be required. And I don't know if it would be put on without being petitioned, or if they would want, you know, 5% of the voters to sign the petition.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you for that clarification. And you know me, I always think worst case scenario, just for us, so we can do planning purposes. So if it did turn out to be 5%, then we would only need to try to collect like over 200 signatures, 220 signatures. Though I think it's always best to get more, right, Jessica, in case something doesn't pan out. Like, would you suggest trying to shoot for like 250, even though we need 218 or something like that?
Well, they need to be Jericho voters, so that's a question to ask people. Like, it's not actually helpful to have people from outside the town sign the petition, because you know, they're not going to be valid signatures. But the only time I've been involved with petitioning an article on town meeting ballot was to have the town tree, to vote on the town tree. And the group that I was with thought we should get 10%, just because that way the select board wouldn't have to make a decision, yes or no. It would just go on. And so it went on, and it was a very short discussion at town meeting, but the elm tree at the Essex Jericho line is the Jericho town tree.
So I'm thinking, you know, if we do this, it would take some, if we had to get signatures, it would take significant time through, you know, December and January, and then we would have to motivate people to show up in March. So with that being said, I would like to know if there's any motions from the committee about approaching the select board to adding the question of moving. Well, we'll have to decide, do we want to just do yes, no votes, or go full out for all in-person town meeting floor votes to an Australian ballot? And if they do not agree to do so, authorizing the committee and volunteers to collect signatures from registered voters. Would anyone like to make a motion regarding that?
So we have two potential things that we could be petitioning for. One is the budget by Australian ballot, and the other is public questions, which are the yes, no questions by Australian ballot. And Wendy, I think your question was, or your strategery. There was an interesting exercise. But Jessica, I think your comment too, that this actually may lead to more discussion, and may introduce discussion to the folks who are at town meeting, and are on the floor is a good point. Is a good point too. I'm not sure that I have a strong opinion one way or the other about doing both, or just limiting it to yes, no at this point. Wendy, how do you feel about it? Since
Yeah, I'm feeling a bit conflicted, because I do agree. I agree, Jessica, that it could lead to a great discussion, but you know, the people that show up to town meeting love town meeting, and they can show up. And it's a big part, I think, of their identity as someone who lives in Jericho. Like it's part of that. And I don't, you know, I'm not sure how persuasive. I'm not sure how when it's so rooted in one's identity as a Jericho voter or a Jericho resident, Jericho citizen, however they perceive themselves, like is that discussion during town meeting day when they're all, you know, kind of enamored with the being in town meeting day, is that going to persuade folks to change?
But do you think they would even vote for the yes, no vote? Like, how would you make that argument? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't want to, I don't want to be sneaky.
Yeah,
Like,
I know. Well, this is the DEI's committee. I mean, they're gonna see this
Yeah.
video, obviously, because
yeah.
So, I mean, maybe it's better just to be upfront
Yeah.
with everyone and say, this is a conversation we want to have in our community. These are the survey results. These are the turnout results. We feel like this is worthy of discussion, and ask people if they think it's really important to turn out to town meeting.
Mm-hmm. Then I think we really do have to have a clear idea of how it works in other towns, and we're feeding that information out in prior to town meeting day, that we have you know, continuous presence on Front Porch Forum on our website about alternatives and why we think it's important. So it's more of a public information campaign.
So, do I hear any motions? As the chair, I've been told you can't make a motion.
I would like to make a motion that we ask the select board to include 2 articles for vote on town meeting. One, to adopt all budget articles by Australian ballot, and the second, to vote on all public questions by Australian ballot.
I have the motion on the floor from SJ. Do I hear any seconds?
I'll second, but then I have a question. Um,
Well, I think you can say that the motion has been seconded, and we can now open it up for discussion. And debate.
okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So these would be decided at town meeting then, where we're probably not, I mean, I'm disappointed that we did not get much of the public here tonight. I was hoping, in fact, 2 people had told me that they would be here, but they aren't here. So I'm just wondering how much of a chance we have of getting enough people, you know, to town meeting to at this point. I mean, I think it's a worthy goal. I'm not sure if we have enough time now for this coming year. It seems to me, and it's like, it's like a bigger picture. I know this is Vermont and I know we're exceptional and all, but I was reading a thing by Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, and he's saying, well, we don't necessarily want everybody to vote. We only want the people voting who are going to vote our way. It kind of seems the same way. I mean, there's a minority of people who basically are able to, kind of run the show. And I'm not sure they want everybody, in the decision-making process. So certainly I think it's something that we should pursue, or that this committee should pursue, but I'm just afraid at this point, I'm not sure it would go anywhere.
I think we all need to be really thoughtful about how we're talking about our neighbors and how we're thinking about this question. I think that that, the folks who go to town meeting take it really seriously. They do their research. They have read that budget line for line. They have thought about it. And I think that from a lot of the responses that we saw in the survey, many of them are concerned about not so much not wanting certain pockets of the population to vote, but wanting to make sure that, that the voters are informed. And that's not something that, I mean, who's informed and how can you predict that and blah, 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 blah. But, I want to be careful about, I think the conversation that we're having, there's a strategic conversation about this is something that we want to get past, and how do we make sure that the people who feel passionately about this are able to be represented in that room for that floor vote. But I don't want to take I want to be careful not to have the other extreme conversation of, well, we don't want the people at the floor vote to be voting on this, because we absolutely do. And I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion that everybody who attends town meeting is necessarily going to want to preserve it. I'm sure many people in the room had similar experiences to mine, and also understand the bigger picture. All of that being said, I think that the timeline of this does feel really, really rushed, because it's such a big issue and a little bit of a powder keg for Vermonters. But I think, we can start this conversation and get out the information and do the public campaign and see what happens in March and learn from that, and then huddle together and make a decision about what we do moving forward in March.
Yeah, I'd just like to piggyback a little bit on what SJ is saying, because if you read some of the survey results and some of the emails that came into our email address, they actually are coming from people who attend town meeting, and they actually don't think that the process is equitable, a lot of them, and have questioned if continuing town meeting in its current form is the right thing to do. Even just looking at the survey, you can see that 72 people took the survey. And in the end, when you said, would it be easier for everyone to vote, it was like 90%. So 90% of those people include people that attend town meeting. So I don't think everyone at town meeting thinks is as, strict along the lines of, this is what I think we should do and continue doing it. So I think there's an opportunity to be able to have the discussion and have people, think about it, because as you can see from some of the comments, I think some people are not seeing it from the equitable perspective. I was really disappointed to read some of those comments, especially one in general, just as well if you're too handicapped to access a handicap accessible facility. Well, sorry, it's that kind of that, but I don't think everyone feels that way. And I think people think, it is important that everybody should have the right to vote if they can do so. Because I'm sure if they were in that situation, they would want the ability to do so. So hopefully we can appeal to that. Who knows? I agree that is a tight time period. So I would totally be okay if someone said, you know what, maybe we need a year to prep for this and we try to do it next time. Now that I'm finding out that we don't have the added bonus of having it being an election year, and more people voting via Australian ballot, that's not going to make a difference. I thought we had to do it by this March because we're going to have more voters in March. As you can see from the table, the attendance at town meeting does not fluctuate based on election years. So if it's feeling too overwhelming, we could wait and plan, but I would love to keep everybody from this committee engaged in working on it. I would hate to have some of the members leave and then we don't have the momentum, so that's my one concern. If we're all passionate about this and engaged right now, let's do it, you know what I mean? But it does mean taking a lot of time and effort in the next 3 months, so.
Just to clarify, there were 72 responses to the survey, right? That's correct, okay.
Petition needs to be in by mid-January,
January.
so a month during the holidays.
We would have to find locations, like something going on. I think we talked about like a concert at MMU or something like that, where we could set up a table and try to hit as many, people as possible. I don't know if there's any holiday markets going on. I know there's one going on sooner than later. But if there was something like that, we could set up something like that.
I mean, the other thing, I don't know that I'm not advocating, I'm spitballing. The other thing we could do is ask the select board to put it on. And if they don't, then we can say, we don't think that we can feasibly get 400 signatures in a month. And that can make our determination for us. Realistic, like I could give 2 days of signature collecting, but this time of year I probably can't give more than that.
I think it would require even soliciting volunteers to help us get signatures. I don't think we alone could make it happen. I think we might have to even ask the Jericho residents, say, if you're passionate about this, please help us collect some signatures.
In the interest of time, I see it's 9:15.
Yeah. So
If there's no other discussion or questions, can we vote on this? And then those who are interested could form a subcommittee and continue that at another time?
But to clarify, but I think, Esther, are you thinking of amending the motion?
That would be an amendment if that's something that folks feel. I'm willing to pound the pavement and try if people want to do it. I'm offering us an off ramp. If people want to take it.
how about if the select board either puts it on the warning or stipulates a 5% signature requirement. I think that's probably a little bit more doable than trying to do the 10.
Okay. So
But the-
I'll amend my motion to clarify that we will ask for the same two articles. And we will ask the select board to either add the articles or require a 5% petition. And if they require 10%, then we as a committee will postpone and plan for the 2025 town meeting.
Do we have to get a second for that amendment?
Thanks.
or-
I think so, yes. So, but I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. All right, any discussion on the new amendment? On the new motion as amended? All right, hearing none, can we take a vote? All those in favor of going to the select board, asking them to vote on the two, or asking them to place the two articles mentioned on the warning for town meeting, and if they don't, asking them for a 5% signature requirement. If not, we will regroup and plan for next year. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, that's unanimous. We don't have to ask for any names, so that's great. Thank you, everyone. I will be, if you're available to help me with that, some of you, maybe SJ with the survey results, and Wendy or Brian or Sonnet, Nate, if you want to help me plan for that on Thursday. I need to get them the video by tomorrow, and so if you could send me that link, SJ, and I'm going to send them the turnout table, and I'd like to send them the survey results, probably the presentation that you created, if that's all right. Maybe you can even help me give the presentation on Thursday. If you
Yeah, and we can meet offline about it too, because I think I would like to I'd like to put together the survey results, your table, a couple of other things, and then there were quite a few people who gave us their email addresses. I'd like to send all the results of the survey back to the people who participated.
Yeah, and someone actually did mention, please post something about this afterwards on Front Porch Forum, because we would be really curious to know what.
Yeah, so
were-
maybe that can go on our January agenda.
Okay, yes, and they need that documentation by tomorrow morning, I guess, for the packet. So if you and I can talk after this, that'd be great. I
So
know,
can I just clarify? So you all are going to this Thursday's meeting?
yeah, and in anticipation of this, I talked with Paula, and she has added us to the agenda. And she said, as long as I get her documentation for the select board's packet by Tuesday morning, they will have what they need, I guess, to help deliberate and hopefully have an answer on Thursday. They might not have it. We might have to wait till the next meeting, but hopefully. So sorry to be taking so long on this. So the next agenda was just to do a quick update on our collaboration with MMUUF for an event against hate. Just really quickly going over it. Brian and I met with two members from the fellowship, Jen Fink and Beth Esmond, and we are looking to do an event the Sunday of MLK weekend, January 14th at 3 p.m. At the barn in Jericho on Route 15. We want it to be a safe place and healing event for all those who attend. This is not an event to try to make Jericho look or feel good, but to let community members know that we care. We talked about making this an interfaith event, but with faith leaders who don't necessarily live in, like, we don't have a synagogue, we don't have a mosque. So it feels a little strange, maybe. We don't want it to feel exploitive. to invite, faith leaders from other communities necessarily. So we were thinking more along the lines of making it local and community members. So we thought maybe we could focus, instead of asking people to bring a song or a prayer or a poem or a reading, and share it with the group. And then I mentioned I'd be interested in putting together a choir to lead attendees and some songs or something. So that's what we're working on. I kind of dropped the ball this last week, Brian, because I was planning for this. So I will try to get back to people on that. But I think the next step might be looking for just letting people know, creating a Facebook event page, putting it on our page, and because it'll come up quickly in January. We're just a month and a couple of weeks away. So, all right, and now moving to the statement submitted by Brian. Hopefully y'all had a chance to look at it. I can share it on the screen.
This was a really nice piece of writing, Brian.
Oh, I had too many windows open, that's why. Would you like to take over and read through this, Brian?
In a way, I think we're too late on this already. We had a chance to be out ahead of any violence, but we were cautious. We moved forward. I'm beginning to plan an event. Nothing yet had happened that we knew of, nothing violent that we knew of in Vermont. But now we know that something has happened. And I think we have to say something. And if we don't stand up against hate and violence, what do we stand up against? What do we stand for? And that's all I have to say.
Would you like to read through, do you want to read through your statement? Or would you like me to read it?
I could. Since October 7, there have been increasing incidents of anti-Semitic and anti-Arabic Islamic rhetoric, threats, and violence across the U.S. Arabic, Muslim, and Jewish Americans have been victims of hate crimes. The people from these groups across the country are feeling fearful and unsafe. While we would like to believe that our town and our state are immune to ethnic, religious hatred and violence, the shooting of 3 Palestinian American students in Burlington on November 25th makes it clear that we are not. We, Jericho's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, JDEI, are concerned for the emotional and physical well-being of all Jericho residents. While we recognize that our townspeople may have different opinions and respect their First Amendment rights to share them and engage in respectful and peaceful discourse, we condemn hatred and violence of any kind and are in agreement that such had no place in Jericho. As a recently adopted Declaration of Inclusion states, Jericho is committed to being a welcoming place for all people. And I'd like to see all of us add our names.
And where would you like to see it posted?
Certainly in Front Porch Forum and any other place that we think it would be important to place.
On our website?
Sure.
I just have a question, and I don't, and only I think only I'm asking this because I'm influenced a lot about what I read in the news. But is there a reason why you used Arabic rather than Palestinian, or included Palestinian?
Well, my thinking is Palestinians, like Egyptians, like Iraqis, like Libyans, and other groups are all Arabic. The various groups of Arabs, in fact, I guess are probably technically Semitic. And unfortunately, whereas the people in the three men in Burlington were Palestinian, I think the hatred and rhetoric is not confined, merely to Palestinian people. I thought Arabic was a little more encompassing, a little more universal. And I included Islamic also, because many people of Arab ancestry are Christian, and some are also Jews. But that could be expanded, I suppose.
Is there any changes people would like made then to the statement? Should we have a motion first and then a discussion on it? If there should be changes made, is that?
So Maria, should I make the motion then?
Sure.
Okay. I move that we take this statement and post it in Front Porch Forum and other places that the committee agrees it should be located.
We have a motion on the floor. Does anyone second that motion?
I'll second.
Do we have any discussion on anything we'd like to say about this? Any changes you would like to potentially see made with it?
There was one part. It's a very small potential edit that it's while we recognize that our townspeople may have different opinions and respect their First Amendment rights to share them and engage in respectful and peaceful discourse, we condemn hatred and violence of any kind and are in agreement that such have no place in Jericho. I'm wondering if those are really two separate thoughts.
Yeah, I would get rid of the while and make
Yeah.
them two sentences.
Two sentences, that's my suggested edit.
We recognize that our townspeople may have different opinions and respect personal rights to share them and engage in some people, period.
Period. Okay.
We condemn hatred and violence of any kind and are in agreement that such includes. Who's we in that respect? The DEI still.
Sure.
Are you amenable to that? Okay with you, Brian?
Yep. I'm okay with that.
Does anyone want to make any change to this section as mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's, similar with 9/11, where there was a general outbreak of hatred or violence or, against people who were even perceived to be Arabic or Muslim in any way. there were reports of Sikhs being attacked, and so I tried to make it as encompassing, I thought, as I could.
Yeah, I see that. And I really do appreciate you writing this.
Yeah, I know I have a friend from Iran and she says she's feeling unsafe and disturbed by the shootings and what's going on. So, I think it is good to open it up more to, and then you do mention the shooting of the 3 Palestinian American students. So I think that makes it a little clearer too if somebody had a question. But, all right. If we're happy with how this looks, would you like to take a vote on this? Yeah.
I have one question
Sure.
that they came to me regarding our names under it. Arnold is not here. He has not commented. Would, I don't know, if somebody has a better suggestion, I could ask him if he would like his name to be included, and if not, just not have his name there, but have the rest of ours there. Does that sound okay?
I guess we should say, is everybody okay with having their name added to this? Because we have all the, thankfully, we have our full membership minus Arnold tonight, so.
Yeah, I think we'll have a majority to have the letter on behalf of the committee, and then anyone who's here is whose name should go on it. And Brian, I would offer that if you would like to extend to Arnold the opportunity to have his name here, but if you don't hear back, or if you don't feel like that's appropriate, that's okay too. I think he's not here, so.
Right. I'd be happy to email him and wait a day or two.
So all those in favor of signing your name to the statement and having it put out on the Front Porch Forum and potentially, I would say, our website, our webpage, and if another location in town comes to mind, all those in favor of having that happen, please raise your hand and say aye.
Hi.
All those
Thank
opposed? All right. So shall I leave that to you, Brian, to handle then? You can reach out to Sabina if you need to put it on our webpage, and
Okay.
you can, once you've talked with Arnold or not, and then you can decide when to put it on Front Porch Forum. Does that work?
Okay.
Otherwise, I would say, I really think we probably should we could use the DEI email account. I don't know if we could I think we probably could make a Front Porch Forum email address if you don't feel comfortable being the one posting it, but that's up to you.
Huh. That would be great.
I can see if I can create an account if you'd like.
Okay. That'd be great, Maria.
I'm not sure how that works because I've never tried it for like somebody else.
Yeah, because I think you have to put in an address, right?
I think so. I don't mind doing it.
You can turn off the direct responses.
Right.
Does everybody, well, I guess everybody's names are on their thing. I was just gonna say, if you want to put your the correct spelling of your name in the chat. Brian, I'm just giving you my actual name instead of my
Oh,
nickname.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it Sarah Jane?
I was gonna put them in alphabetical order by last name, so I would go last, I guess.
My name's a lot shorter now.
What is your name now?
It's just Veray. It's my new old name.
Sounds
I
liberating.
miss my old name. I want to go back. My marriage is fine. I just miss my name.
All right, and yeah, you'll put in alphabetical order. I just wanted to put all the names down here, just so you have them. Does that look correct, everyone? I will send
You're
that.
so good, Maria. Yeah, that looks awesome. Don't forget yourself.
Did I not put myself? Oh my
Yeah,
God,
no, you
I
did.
thought I did. Thank you for putting that together. I'm sorry, we're a half hour over what I wanted. Quickly, rules for next meeting. Nathan, or Nate will be, I don't know which you prefer. I'm so sorry. Which do you prefer?
I mean, either is fine. I'm rather
I see-
impartial.
I
Yeah.
see Nathan on the screen, but then I know a couple people call you Nate, so I just want to make sure
Yeah.
I'm calling you. by your-
Anything is fine. Yeah.
Okay, well, Nate will be the chair of our meeting in January. I forget who is doing notes. Is that you, SJ?
The calendar set or the original rotation schedule says Wendy.
Okay, Wendy, are you prepared?
Does that,
for-
okay.
And yeah, we didn't change it at all. It was only this last switch so I could share.
Okay.
I had to take notes twice, but that was it. And then we have to change our meeting date because we meet on January 1st, which is New Year's Day, so we can't meet that day. So I don't know if you want to pick a date tonight, but maybe Esther, you've been really good at helping us figure out dates in the past. Is
Yeah,
that-
why don't I send around, I'll have that be my to-do so that we can get out of here and make sure that we're not at the same time as another town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we will be in touch. Hopefully, some of you are available on Thursday to help us speak with the select board. And we can maybe have a little Zoom session Wednesday or something, just to,
Yeah, I might be able to go to the town itself if you think that would be helpful.
yeah, I was going back and forth. If I need to use my computer, it's a lot easier to share stuff from, home. But I also know that turning up in person might be more impactful, so I'm not sure. So maybe we can figure that out as a group. So I will reach out to, seems like SJ and Wendy have been the ones helping me out most on this. So did that work? And then Brian, do you want to be involved at all? on
I'm sorry,
Thursday?
what was that?
Do you want to be involved at all on Thursday?
I don't think I can.
Okay, that makes it simple.
I think I'll have a crazy week.
Simpler, so, okay. So I will be in touch with SJ and Wendy. Thank you so much. You all have a great evening.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, thank you, SJ. That's a wonderful thing. Do I have any seconds? All right, Nate, seconds. All those in favor of ending this meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you so much. everybody.
Thanks all. Thank you, Maria.
Have a
Bye.
good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.